Hi everyone, my name is Mackenzie Jackson, and today I'm going to be presenting on the symbolism of ravens within medievalism. In this presentation, we are going to explore how ravens function as complex symbols across different periods of time, especially from the Anglo-Saxon literature to modern texts today. Ravens hold a certain level of complexity that we don't always fully recognize. They appear across mythology, historical texts, and literature that is especially tied to medievalism. Depending on the culture or context, ravens can symbolize death, wisdom, transformation, or even act as messengers between the worlds. What makes ravens especially interesting is that they are not limited to one meaning. Rather, they shift depending on how they are used within a culture or a textual setting. My main argument is that ravens are evolving symbols. In medieval literature, they primarily represent physical death and war, but in later literature, we see them take on a deeper psychological and emotional meaning. This shift shows how symbolism changes over time while always maintaining its original roots. So, first, we're going to look at what is medievalism. I believe before diving deeper, it's important that we truly understand what medievalism is. Medievalism refers to the systems of beliefs, values, and cultural practices inspired by the European Middle Ages. During this time period, there was a strong connection between nature and human fate. People believed that natural elements, such as animals, could reflect deeper truths about what was to come within life, death, and destiny. Ravens fit perfectly into this worldview because they are often seen around battlefields and death, so they became strongly associated with mortality and the supernatural realm. This connection between ravens and death is one of the earliest symbolic meanings we see, and it continues to influence how we interpret them today. Ravens in Anglo-Saxon literature. In Anglo-Saxon poetry, ravens are commonly connected to war and death. They often appear in what is known as the beasts of the battle motive, which includes animals like ravens, wolves, and eagles. And these animals feed on the dead after things such as war or crime is committed. In our course reading, The Battle of Finnsburg, which was one of the heroic poems that we went over, we see the line, "The birds of carrion will be calling the gray-pelted wolf bang." Even though the poem doesn't specifically say raven, a bird of a carrion refers to birds that are scavengers, such as ravens, and this imagery shows ravens as creatures that appear after violence happens and they feed on the dead. This reflects a medieval worldview where death is inevitable and war is a central part of life. Ravens aren't just animals, but they symbolize the aftermath of conflict between humanity and the reality that comes with death. The supernatural, ravens, and death. This idea continues in later interpretations of raven symbolism. According to Literary Devices, which is one of our sources, ravens often symbolize death, evil, and the supernatural. Their presence in literature can immediately create a darker tone or create some sort of unease. Similarly, the study of symbols source explains that ravens are often associated with tragic events, and it reinforces their connection to death. Together, these sources show that across time, have consistently been tied to death, but because they are so frequently associated with death, they are often seen as bad warnings or omens. This is important because it shows how medieval ideas about ravens didn't disappear, they just carried on into later literature and culture. Ravens as knowledge and wisdom. Ravens are not only symbols of death. In other contexts, they are often associated with intelligence and wisdom. The Birds in the Tree article explains that ravens are highly intelligent beings and are often seen as symbols of guidance or some form of awareness. In other cultures, they are even viewed as protectors or spiritual guides. Additionally, the study of symbols source notes that ravens are able to act as messengers between different worlds and realms, suggesting that communication between life and death is brought upon by ravens. This adds another layer to their symbolism. Instead of only being a representation of something negative, they can also represent knowledge or a deeper understanding. This dual meaning is what makes them such a powerful and complex symbol, due to the fact that they are so multifaceted. Cultural memory, medievalism, and ravens. This is where the idea of cultural memory becomes important. According to the Isles scholarly article, symbols like ravens persist because cultural meanings are preserved and reinterpreted throughout different times. In other words, even as society changes and older beliefs, even as society changes, such as older beliefs as well, those medieval and pagan traditions continue to influence how we understand symbols today. Ravens are a perfect example of this because their association with death and the supernatural come from earlier periods, but those meanings are not lost, rather reshaped and adapted into different and new contexts. Ravens as messengers. I would just like to note that this is one of my favorite little GIFs. Another important interpretation comes from the Substack article, which is another source that we have, which describes ravens as messengers that move in between different worlds. They exist between life and death, knowledge and mystery, and this is what we call a liminal figure, meaning that they can exist between two different states of being. Because of this, ravens are able to represent transformation. They aren't just symbols of endings, but also change and transition coming your way. This interpretation adds even more depth to the already multi-layered meaning that they hold. Ravens seen in present literature. In modern literature, raven symbolism becomes even more internal and psychological. We look at Edgar Allan Poe, for example. His poem, The Raven, represents grief, loss, and emotional suffering. Unlike in medieval texts, the raven is not on a battlefield, but rather he is within the speaker in his personal space. The bird repeatedly says nevermore, which just reinforces the idea of loss and the permanence and the idea that the speaker will never be able to be reunited with his lover. Here, the raven becomes a symbol of the speaker's mental state, and it represents how grief and painful memories are able to linger, but they do not ever fully disappear. Ravens are multidimensional. When we look at all of these sources together, it becomes clear that ravens are multidimensional symbols. The Birds in the Tree article highlights that ravens are able to represent both positive and negative things, while the Substack article explains that their meaning changes depending on cultural texts. This shows that symbolism is not something that is fixed, but rather it evolves and adapts over time. Ravens can represent death, wisdom, memory, and transformation all at once. Tying it back to medievalism. When we tie everything back to medievalism, we see that the symbols do not disappear, rather, they evolve. In the Anglo-Saxon poetry, ravens represent physical death and the aftermath of war. In later literature, like Poe's work, they represent emotional suffering and psychological conflict. This shift shows how medieval ideas are able to shape modern interpretations, and ravens are able to carry historical meanings and different historical traditions into new contexts, proving that symbolism is something that can be preserved and it is able to adapt while still maintaining its original foundation. To conclude, ravens are one of the most complex symbols in literature. They represent so many things all at once, such as knowledge, wisdom, transformation, grief, and death. Even though their meaning has changed over time multiple times, their core symbolism has remained rooted in medieval beliefs. And this shows that while cultures evolve and humanity and society evolve, the ideas and symbols that we know from the past continue to influence us in present day. Ultimately, ravens demonstrate how powerful symbolism can be, because even though symbolism will change, it will never ever fully go away. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed. It was really fun to do this. And thank you so much, Dr. Jameson, for everything that you've done for us this semester. Everybody have a great summer.